But let's look at the emotion of self-hatred. Hatred of any type, including hatred of self, covers over rage, and that covers over anger, and that covers over fear, and that covers over grief. Right? Now, can you see, while I stay in hatred of self, I'm at my furthest point from dealing with this grief. Can you see that? So while I'm staying with hatred of self, I am actually avoiding totally the grief. Remember, every one of these is a layer of denial. And hatred, like resentment and other types of emotions, is the most intense layer of denial that we have within ourselves most of the time. And then, of course, this is emotional, by the way. Then we can all go intellectual, and then there's a whole set of layers we can deal with above there. But we're talking about the emotional layers. So while I'm in this hatred mode, it actually stops me, purposefully stops me, from accessing my grief.
So I need to get into rage next and then go down that list?
No, you don't need to get into rage next, or into anger next, or into fear next. You need to get into your grief. Okay. Now, the only time you need to experience the others is if these were a part of the childhood suppression. And in your case, because of some of the abusive things that happened to you, they are. So you will need to step through some of these. But the biggest healer is going to always be the grief. And these are just layers on top of our grief because we don't want to feel our grief. So every time I feel upset or frustrated or angry with myself, I just say to myself, I just don't want to feel how bad or hopeless I am. I don't want to feel my grief about what I've become. I don't want to feel my grief about what I look like now, or what I feel like now, or what my body feels like now, or whatever the issue is inside of myself. I just don't want to feel the grief about it. Now, while you don't want to feel the grief about it, spirits can hook into any one of these. So they can hook into your fear, they can hook into your anger, they can hook into your rage, they can hook into your hatred. And so, yes, you can be heavily influenced in that regard with all of those different emotions. That makes sense? But at the end of the day, all I need to do is feel my grief, and everything else will happen. Now, you're not going to get from self-hatred down to grief in one moment. So you can't expect that to occur, because there'll be layers of blockages to why you created the hatred. Remember, every one of these layers is created by a blockage to the previous layer. So you could say there's the layer of grief, and then there's a blockage, and then there's the fear because of that blockage, and then there's another blockage, and then there's the anger because of that blockage, and then there's another blockage, and then there's the rage that comes from that blockage, and then there's another blockage to your rage, and then there's the hatred that comes from that blockage. Does that make sense? You can see why Mary said focus on dealing with the blockages. Because if you deal with the blockages, the underlying emotion will become present, and you'll be able to feel it every single time. So the truth is, you can deal with any one of these blockages, and you don't have to necessarily deal with them in order, but your soul does know the appropriate order to undo the blockages. So we were talking about this with Josh last night. It was Josh. Oh, there it is. We were talking about this with you last night, weren't we? About just focus on the blockage that the law of attraction has brought to you right at this moment. So for Josh last night, the blockage was he doesn't believe God exists. That's the blockage. Now, it's a big blockage, isn't it? You're on a divine love path and you don't believe God exists. That's going to be a blockage. Bound to be a blockage, right? So don't worry about doing everything else. Don't worry about anything else. Just focus your attention on the blockage that you know exists there. And when Josh started feeling into that, there was lots of terror and fear about if God doesn't exist, what's the point to life? And, you know, what's the point to all of these things? You know what I mean? He started connecting with all of those emotions. So for yourself, it's the same. You can start connecting with some of these blockages, and the very first blockage that will be there will be drawn to you through your law of attraction. So focus on that straight away. Don't put that one off. And start trusting that God made your soul in such a way that you can deal with everything in the appropriate order that you need to most rapidly undo everything. That's how it is.
Can you describe a block in between hatred and rage, something common?
Yeah, a simple block between hatred and rage is I'm not allowed to experience rage because rage is like not spiritual. So I might have this definition of what's spiritual. Rage isn't spiritual. So now my only alternative is to go into hatred.
Or it's not acceptable to be angry at my mother, so I will hate myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid of rage.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I'm afraid of what I might do in a state of rage.
Yeah, I'm afraid of what I will do in a rage. I might destroy everything around me. So I'm far better off stopping my rage. So the blockage stops my rage, but the only alternative is to hate yourself. So you hate yourself as a result.
All right, thank you.
Does that make sense? Yeah. And by the way, if you have rage, this is rage sometimes towards yourself. Does that make sense? Like, if you have rage towards yourself and then you're not allowed to experience the rage towards yourself that you actually have, so you feel frightened of it, then you will have hatred towards yourself. If you have rage towards others and you're not allowing yourself to experience the rage you have towards others, then you will have hatred towards others as a result.
I would also say that sometimes when you have deep grief with someone, with a parental figure, you can have all of this rage build to the point where you feel it's just totally unacceptable even to feel the grief or the rage, so you turn it upon yourself.
Turn it all inwards. Turn it all inwards. And usually when we go to emotional processing, there's really just two types in the end, and that is we're extroverted in the way that we deal with our emotions or introverted in the way we deal with our emotions. A person who's introspective will focus every bit of hatred and anger and rage towards themselves, which is what you do. And then a person who's extroverted will focus every single bit of anger and rage towards somebody else most of the time. But bear in mind that we can even have those different opinions on different subjects within ourselves. So that's why it gets a bit complicated in the end. The idea is, I'm in hatred, I know I'm in... That's a preferable emotion to this grief. That's how I feel. Look at my blockage to going down below. So my first thing is to start looking at my blockages to feeling grief, because that's what creates all this. So start feeling your blockages to feeling your grief. Start feeling your blockages to dealing with your fear. If you can deal with those, a lot of this will automatically disappear. Mm.